Hello, welcome to this Maundy Thursday reflection. It's a service that we're doing similar to what we did for Ash Wednesday this year, especially since we haven't started gathering in person, which we'll do for Easter. And I am taking this time to try and remind you not only what Maundy Thursday is about, the meaning and a little bit of the history, but also to offer you an idea of something you might practice in your own life to make Maundy Thursday more reality this week of Holy Week. So first, you might take notice of where I'm sitting here. I'm going to talk about why I'm sitting here like this, but I encourage you to think about that for a moment as I discuss what the phrase Maundy Thursday means. So remember, we're in Holy Week, which started with Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. And then we arrive on this day, the night of Jesus' arrest, before he would go on to Good Friday and his passion, eventually on the cross. Remember that Maundy Thursday was a night when Jesus gathered his disciples together for a meal. That's where you see this sort of context of what looks like a dining table in front of you. And Jesus was not just any meal that he was doing with his disciples, but specifically Passover. Remember that the people of the Jewish faith had gathered from many countries around for celebrating Passover. And Passover was about that time from Jewish history when they were being released from bondage slavery in Egypt to eventually wander through the wilderness and arrive in the Holy Land. Passover happened because literally the Spirit of God or an angel of God came and passed over the Israelite people so that the message that was being carried to Pharaoh, which required increasing extremes of these events that happened in Egypt, leading up to the death of the firstborn, which was finally what broke Pharaoh's heart and forced him to set the Israelite people free. That idea of an angel carrying death passing over the promised people, the Israelites, is where the word Passover comes from. So they were commanded to remember that event and to celebrate it as part of their religion and part of honoring who God was in the lives of the Israelites, the Jewish people. We too have our own Passover. This time, though, not only are we celebrating the remembrance of what God did in saving the Israelites and freeing them from slavery in Egypt, but now we are remembering what God did in the person of coming down in the flesh in the person of Jesus and his blood being offered just like the blood of the lamb on the doorways for the ancient Israelites, which was the sign to that angel that carried death to not enter that household. So too, Christ's blood is offered above each of us as a different form of Passover. What was the sin and the brokenness of this world that dwelled within each of us and would cost all of us our lives and eternal salvation, Christ's blood offered as a covering for us so that same justification, that same punishment which might steal life from us would be passed over us and enable us to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And so we know that in hindsight, that's what Easter's about. Jesus' resurrection and his sacrifice is a new form of Passover. And so it's no mistake, no coincidence that on the night that Jesus was to eat his last with his disciples, when he would be arrested, and then that would lead to his crucifixion, death, and resurrection, that they would be gathered together at a table celebrating the Jewish remembrance of Passover from freedom from the Egyptians. And today I wanted to set this for you all to not only inspire that memory, but to be reminded of why we celebrate Maundy Thursday. So Maundy comes from the Latin word mandatum, which means the same root of the word for mandate for us, a commandment, something you must do. It happens used in that way on Maundy Thursday, not only because of the commandment to have to remember Passover and to celebrate it, but also because Jesus gives them a new commandment that evening. In celebrating the Passover meal with them and in breaking the bread and in pouring the wine, he says, "Do this in remembrance of me." This act of eating the bread and sharing the wine, which we do in communion and we'll celebrate on Easter and every first Sunday of the month and other seasons in between, that comes from that commandment Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. But there's also John tells it about a foot washing event that happened right after the meal. And so you get this night where Jesus gives them these new commands of things to do, now remembering not only what God had done for the Israelites, but also what God was doing for them in the person of Jesus. I've said it numerous times, but I really want to emphasize it now for you all on this Maundy, Thursday, that the act of communion that we celebrate as a sacrament is indeed a good one in terms of remembering what Christ did and offering up his body, his blood as a sacrifice so that the justification of God might pass over us and allow us the mercy of salvation through his sacrifice. But communion, when we celebrate it in the church, is good for remembering that and practicing that and teaching that. But it misses a huge part of what Jesus actually did with his disciples that night. Now, I've intentionally set this table with one place setting, no other place settings, no other chairs. And that's supposed to be hopefully sticking in your mind as a visual if something's not quite right there. Because most of the time, when we're sitting down at a formal meal like this, we wouldn't be eating it by ourselves. We do communion with at least one other. When I go to visit someone, unless it's an extreme circumstance, I almost always go with at least another deacon or an elder, because the scriptures say we're not supposed to do it on our own, that it's supposed to be done together. But I remember learning part of what communion was about for me really came alive when I worked at the soup kitchen, and I would witness people not just go through the line to be served, but I witnessed some of that interaction, not only between people who were there being served, but those doing the serving too. And it occurred to me that the more somebody was there and got to know people, the more opportunity they had to learn more about that person. But not just the serving line, not just bussing tables, but really the best interactions happen when folks sat down at the same table together. I'm a pretty tall guy, and I can stand over top of most other people when we're walking around greeting each other. But isn't it fascinating? By the time we're all adults, most of us, when we sit down at chairs, we're relatively the same height. We look each other mostly in the eye once you're seated. Now, I think it's interesting that Christ encourages us through this act of communion, when done in the way that Christ did it with his disciples, to sit at table with someone, to break bread, to see them eye to eye, and to not only do the act that we do in church of remembering the sacrifice of Christ with that bit of bread and bit of juice, but, and this is the important part, real communion happens among fellow believers. I've said oftentimes, just like at the soup kitchen, if you really wanted to take the deep dive and see what the real magic, the real gift of that place had to offer, it wasn't just in doing the acts of sacrifice and helping other people. It was sitting down, sharing a meal, getting to learn more about that individual person's name and their story. Well, the same is true, regardless of whether it's an act of sacrifice at a soup kitchen or an act of sacrifice of time and willingness in a church. I really believe that a lot of communion happens not just in what we do in remembering it in the sanctuary as a sacrament, but often in what many of you have done for years right after the formal church service is over. It's our service and a lot of services end just in time for lunch. And many of you have gone for decades with your fellow believers out to lunch afterwards. And what do you do when you sit down at that table together and you break bread or share food or eat food in each other's company? You don't just eat in silence. You speak to one another. You talk about your daily lives, about things that are important, about things that are fun, sometimes about things that are hard or stressful. You commune in a way that's more than just about food or even just about remembering what Christ did in our lives. You enact your brotherly and sisterly love for each other in relationship, using something as simple as food as a way to connect. Brothers and sisters, that's what real communion is supposed to be about bringing us together as fellow believers, about using a simple act like food to make it egalitarian, all sitting together at the same table, all seeing each other regardless of age or social status, or whatever else might divide us, seeing each other eye to eye, eating the same kinds of things, spending time, getting to know each other, hearing each other out. I would offer to you on this Maundy, Thursday, as we're getting ready to do Easter for some of us together, but still in the midst of this pandemic and some of the crazy and unusualness of this time. If you want to try and do something a little countercultural, a little radical from the ways of our world, a little more in line with what Maundy, Thursday, the original one, the Passover meal that Christ did with his disciples, was really about, then take the time to sit down at table and share a meal with not only maybe one of your family members or a close friend, and more with the weather getting nice, even if it's people who aren't in your immediate bubble of this pandemic circle, you could sit outdoors at a table. I've done that as recently as last weekend. Sit with somebody and share, eat a meal together, and share some of that relationship, that conversation, that intentionality of time spent with each other. Be reminded that commandment, that new mandate that Christ gave us at that Last Supper with his disciples, wasn't just about a little bit of bread and a little bit of juice that we do as a sacrament in church, but it was about forming relationships, spending intentional time together with fellow believers, seeing each other face to face, eye to eye, getting to know a little bit more about the depth of each other's story. Our life lived in faith is not intended for us to be just on our own. It is intended for us to be in communion, to be with fellow believers. And it is best lived, best enacted, most empowered by the Spirit when we do that together. May you practice that and experience it fully. Amen.